Cline.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for joining us. It's good to have you with us. It's good to be in this room in person, and I'm pleased to be a new member of the committee in this room. But you talked about facts and science guiding your decisions when it comes to Title 42, for example, which I would advise we should not repeal. I think it's a policy that is necessary to protect the public health, and I would urge you to continue to enforce it. But I want to talk about a different sub-agency that you have, the CDC, and allowing politics to override policy and science. A report of the Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Crisis revealed that the CDC allowed the American Federation of Teachers to rewrite critical portions of the Biden administration's school reopening guidance. The CDC initially planned to issue guidance that would have been more favorable toward opening schools, but reversed course after consulting with teachers' union bosses, giving favorable treatment and access to teachers' unions instead of parents, and ignoring science and the necessity of opening our schools. And we see what that resulted in, not just lower test scores for our children, but also increases in depression rates, increases in suicide rates, increases in drug and alcohol addiction rates, increases in domestic violence in the home. So let me ask you first, Mr. Secretary, were you in contact with the American Federation of Teachers about these guidelines?
So, Congressman, I'd love to probe
yes or
some
no
of what
would be
you said,
perfect.
but I have not been in direct touch with any particular stakeholder just on those guidelines itself. We have done numerous stakeholder meetings with all sorts of organizations, individuals, governments on the issues, because that's what we always do, is whether CDC or us, we always consult with everyone that might be impacted. So along the way in formulating any proposal, we speak to anyone who might be impacted.
So the answer is yes to that.
I didn't say that was the answer. I said we speak to every, if you want to characterize it properly, Congressman, and having been in your seat before,
I would love a yes or no answer to
that. Misquoted. We have sat down with every stakeholder who has asked us on those particular issues.
Okay, and that includes the AFT.
I'm pretty sure it has.
Okay. Is it department policy to keep draft guidance confidential?
Draft guidance is within the internal operations of the department.
Right, and historically in the CDC, draft guidance has been kept confidential, correct?
Well, it's an internal document. It's not something for public consumption because it's not yet ready for prime time.
Right, so sharing it, as testified to by the director of the CDC for the Select Coronavirus Crisis Task Force, they testified that it was unusual to release that guidance to an outside group.
I'm not sure I would characterize what happened as you have, but what I will tell you is in consulting and meeting with stakeholders, we certainly give them some sense of what we're looking at and ask for their guidance. How much actually translated into what you've described, that's where I think the facts have to answer that question.
Are you aware of other cases in which the CDC or any other agencies under HHS have incorporated language from outside stakeholders?
We certainly, as I said, we offer every stakeholder an opportunity to comment, whether it's a formal rule that we're getting ready to promulgate or whether we're looking to have a guidance. We always reach out, every administration has, at least I hope they have, to have those who might be impacted to get their input. Might their input help us shape the final version of that guidance or rule? I would hope so, because we're supposed to listen to the American people.
Okay. Moving forward, would you commit to citing those outside partners who may have been consulted in the development of these guidelines?
Congressman, that's all public record.
When you are developing these guidelines, you just told me that it's policy to keep draft guidance confidential.
Oh, the draft guidelines, anything that's still internal is internal, but when we reach out to stakeholders, that's publicly available.
Are you committed to listing those stakeholders?
Again, as I said, it's already publicly available. Those meetings are in the public domain.
and citing them in the development of these types of official guidelines?
If you take a look at regulations when they're issued, they will note the comments that have been received, and we usually have to try to be responsive to most of the comments that we receive as we're getting ready, for example, to promulgate a rule. So again, that information that comes in from the public, when we react to it, you'll see it in
Well, you
writing.
didn't cite AFT when you put out those guidelines for school reopening. So I'd encourage you to be more
You've
forthcoming.
reached a lot farther along than what I'm saying we've done.
You're talking about regulations. I'm talking about guidelines where you neglected to disclose that the AFT edited the guidelines on the orders of the White House and put them forward as CDC guidelines and neglected to release the fact that the AFT altered those guidelines. And I'm asking you if you would commit to publicizing the fact that you allow politics to override science when it comes to your guidelines.
Congressman, it'd be tough for me to respond to that because I don't agree with the premise that you've just laid out.
Well, I don't agree with what your CDC did in promulgating those guidelines. Children died because of that. I yield back.
Ms. Watson-Coleman.